Hey April, did you know that bagels are now considered unhealthy and no longer something people will have for breakfast?
What? I didn't know that. Why?
I actually don't know. Personally, I think it's a real Schmear campaign. That's fantastic. I love that. Hi everybody, I am Simon Majumdar, the host and creator of Eat My Globe, a podcast about things you didn't know about food. On today's very special episode, we're going to be talking about, as the joke tells you, one of my favourite foods. That's right, we're going to be talking about the bagel, the chewy Ashkenazi bread that is now popular worldwide, but really found its home in New York City. I would also like to say that among a lot of other research, I did find Maria Belinska's The Bagel, The Surprising History of a Modest Bread to be very useful indeed. In the early 1980s, I first went to New York to visit my relatives, and I became obsessed with having bagels for breakfast. Lox with a schmear, onions and capers. For those who don't know what that is, lox, or originally lax in Yiddish, is, according to Merriam-Webster, quote, salmon that has been cured in brine and sometimes smoked, end quote. A schmear is another Yiddish term, Schmear, or S-H-M-I-R, that Merriam-Webster defines as, quote, a layer of a spreadable food or condiment, end quote. Literally, a schmear of cream cheese. As for the cream cheese, according to Thought Co., quote, cream cheese was invented in 1872 by American dairyman William Lawrence of Chester, New York, who accidentally stumbled on a method of producing cream cheese while trying to reproduce a French cheese called Neufchâtel, end quote. Anyway, Lawrence then began to wrap his cheese in foil packets and started selling it, as you've probably guessed by now, Philadelphia cream cheese. So there you go. Let's start by differentiating Ashkenazi Jewish from the Sephardic Jewish cultures. According to Rabbi Menachem Posner at Shabbat.org, quote, contemporary Ashkenazim are Yiddish-speaking Jews and descendants of Yiddish-speaking Jews. Sephardim originate in the Iberian Peninsula and in the Arabic lands, end quote. What this meant in terms of eating was that Sephardic cuisine, where Sephardic Jewish people came from a more humid and hot climate like Spain and Morocco and parts of the Ottoman Empire, required much lighter food. As Aish.com says, Sephardi cuisine is, quote, a combination of salads, fresh and dried fruit, stuffed vegetables, fragrant sauces, and aromatic spices highlight the ingredients that were readily available in the warmer, sunnier climates and well-worn trade routes of Sephardi communities, end quote. The Ashkenazi Jewish people, on the other hand, came from much colder areas of Central Europe and Eastern Europe, such as Poland, and need rib-sticking food with plenty of carbs, as Rabbi Menachem Posner describes it, quote, gefilte fish, kishka, stuffed derma, potato kugel, pudding, knishes, and chopped liver are all Ashkenazi fare, end quote. It is from this second colder area that the bagel lightly began. Let's define the word bagel, shall we? Alan Davidson, editor of the Oxford Companion to Food, calls it, quote, a dense, round yeast bun with a hole in the middle, end quote, which our old pal Merriam-Webster calls, quote, a firm, donut-shaped roll traditionally made by boiling and then baking. End quote. At which Ed Levine says in his article in the New York Times, quote, a bagel should weigh 4 ounces or less and should make a slight cracking sound when you bite into it instead of a whoosh, end quote. Many people disagree on where the term bagel originated. According to Levine, Joan Nathan, author of the book Jewish Cooking in America, published in 1998, apparently believes the word comes from the German word Beigen, which is spelled B-I-E-G-E-N, which means, quote, to bend, end quote. Merriam-Webster, on the other hand, tells us that the word came from the Old High German word Boch, which meant ring. It then evolved into the Middle High German word Bugel, which also means ring. It then became the Yiddish term beigel, or B-E-Y-G-L. Author Maria Belinska tells of a legend that the bagel came to be to honor Jan Sobieski, the King of Poland, when in 1683 he defeated Ottoman invaders in Vienna. Supposedly, quote, a local baker shaped yeast dough into the shape of a stirrup to honor him, and he called it a beigel, Austrian for stirrup. The roll was a hit, and its shape soon evolved into the one we know today, and its name converted to bagel, end quote. This is, of course, just a myth, since Belinska says that the bagel had been around for 73 years before King Sobieski defeated the Ottomans. Another story about the origins of the word bagel comes from Leo Rostin, the author of The Joys of Yiddish. He says the word was first used in Krakow, Poland. Quote, the first mention of bagels is to be found in the community regulations of Krakow, Poland for the year 1610, which stated that bagels would be given as a gift to any woman in childbirth. End quote. That is 4 stories where the word came from. I suspect there are many more stories as well. Belinska does believe that the term was first used in Krakow in 1610, which might mean that it might already have been used a few years earlier, and that there were already similar types of round bread with a hole from history. These will include areas such as in the Xinjiang area of China, where they have a round-shaped bread called gerdanan, which was made by the Uyghur community, which looks very much like a bagel, but without the hole going all the way through. The gerdanan arrived in China via the Silk Road and looked like the smaller and undecorated version of the wonderful breads I've eaten in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. The gerdanan is cooked in a tandoor. Belinska, however, believes that the gerdanan and bagels are unrelated and developed separately. Another round similar bread is the guanbing, which hails from the Fujian area of China. Legend says that it was created during the time of General Qi Yang of the Ming dynasty, which lasted from 1368 to 1644. Apparently, the general created the bread to avoid detection by their enemies. The fires ready to cook the troops gave them away, so instead he made soldiers carry the already cooked bread, which had a hole in the middle, by threading them and wearing them like a necklace. The bread was then named guanbing, after General Qi Jingang. In Italy, Heather Smith notes that the 14th century Italians have been consuming a round bread called taralli, which was, quote, both sweeter and harder, end quote. Author Joan Nathan also describes these taralli as, quote, hard round crackers flavoured with fennel that have been the local snack for centuries in Puglia, Italy. End quote. Nathan also notes that round bread with a hole goes back even further to ancient Egypt, where they had been depicted in hieroglyphics. And perhaps the most obvious round bread with a hole is from Poland itself, which is known as the obwazanek, which comes from the word obwazić, meaning to parboil. Belinska notes that this obwazanek bread goes all the way back to 1394 and was eaten by a pious Polish queen who ate it during Lent due to its lack of fat. As you can see, the bagel was created in an environment that already had a variety of round breads with a hole found in other parts of the globe. So where did the modern bagel originate? According to the Oxford Companion to Food, the bagel came from southern Germany to Poland, and from Poland to North America. Let's start with Germany. Belinska argues that the bagel may have started off as a communion bread that evolved into a pretzel in Germany, where the pretzel was considered a feast day bread. German immigrants brought them to Poland. She also notes that pretzels have appeared in Jewish 13th century documents, so we can infer that Jewish Germans knew how to make them and also likely brought them to Poland when they left Germany for Poland. And eventually the pretzels evolved into a round bread with a hole, and possibly it became known in Poland as the pious Polish queen's favourite round boiled bread of Wazanek. Belinska also tells of a folk tale that bagels began in the 9th century in Prussia, which was part of the German rule. The story goes that Christians in Prussia prohibited Jews from baking bread because they associated bread with the body of Christ. So Jewish bakers then decided to boil bread instead of baking them. Whether the story is true or not, Jewish German bakers who migrated to Poland found protection from the Polish king when in the 17th century he allowed Jewish bakers to make white bread and the obwazanek bread, which we discussed earlier was parboiled and lacked fat. And so the modern bagel may have started off as a pretzel that either became the obwazanek or pretzel that got mashed together with the obwazanek by Jewish German immigrants to Poland. How did this bagel from Poland begin going around the world and end up with their spiritual home in New York City? The Ashkenazi people from Poland began to arrive in New York City towards the end of the 1800s to escape anti-Semitism in Eastern Europe at the time, and they brought with them much of their baking. These included some of my favourite treats, such as knish, which Merriam-Webster describes as, quote, a small round or square of dough stuffed with a filling, such as potato, and baked or fried, end quote. It really is one of my favourite things. They also brought hamantaschen, a poppy-filled treat made for the Jewish festival of Purim. They also brought bialys, one of my absolute favourite treats since I was introduced to them by one of my pals in New York, Sandra Levine. This is similar to a bagel, which the Atlantic calls bagel's less-known cousin. It uses the same dough, but is baked, not boiled, and has an indentation rather than a hole on the top. This is usually topped with caramelized onions. Of course, they brought the most popular of all, the bagel. It was so popular with the Jewish community that by the early part of the 1900s, the bagel makers created a union known as the Union Local 338, as part of the Bakery and Confectionery Workers International. The union was also so important in fighting off the mafia, who wanted to take control of its more than 2 million bagels production each week. Wow. Yet, despite this massive operation, even by the 1960s, bagels were only really known by the Jewish community, and was described by the New York Times in 1960 as, quote, an unsweetened donut with rigor mortis, and it takes good teeth to chew even a fresh bagel, end quote. According to Jason Turbo's article for Grub Street, the bagel makers have faced horrific working conditions. He cites an industry report which declared, quote, there appears to be no other industry, not even the making of clothes in sweatshops, which carried on amid such dirt and filth, end quote. He also cited a Yiddish saying, quote, lig in der Erd und bag beigel, end quote. You're going to have to forgive my pronunciation there. I don't know Yiddish quite well enough. This apparently means lay in the ground and bake bagels. Crikey. The unions soon began to regulate the conditions by which the workers used to operate and oversee the conditions of the workers. With this came a certain amount of what Jason Turbo describes as, quote, professional leverage, end quote. The union name 338 came from the number of Jewish people they had in their membership, who spoke Yiddish only, and they even had their own newspaper of record known as Vorwärts, or the Forward. Soon, the bagel bakers became very, very wealthy. As Jason Turbo puts it, quote, these men purchased homes on Long Island, drove fancy cars, and sent their children to prestigious colleges. It was a copacetic ecosystem, working out favourably for all involved, end quote. However, by the 1950s and 1960s, bagels became to be known outside the New York Jewish community. We see bagel recipes in places like Family Circle magazine, quote, stumped for the hors d'oeuvres ideas? Here's a grand one from Fanny Engel. Split these tender little triumphs in halves and then quarters, spread with sweet butter, and place a small slice of smoked salmon on each. For variations, spread with cream cheese, anchovies, or red caviar. They're also delicious served as breakfast rolls. End quote. By this time, the combination of lox, bagel, and cream cheese became a popular Sunday breakfast that rivaled the other breakfast combination of bacon, eggs, and toast. From there, we have brothers Sam, Marvin, and Murray Lender to thank for the bagel being taken to the rest of the United States. Their father, Harry Lender, came to New York from Poland in 1927. Shortly thereafter, Harry bought an 800 square feet bakery called the New York Bagel Bakery. Harry's children worked in the family business. By 1934, they grew their business and expanded their bakery to 1,200 square feet. By the late 1950s, Harry and his sons, Sam and Murray, began to freeze their bagels to keep up with demand. It was, however, a family secret and, quote, no one was allowed to know that these bagels were frozen, end quote. No one could tell the difference for 2 years until someone accidentally delivered a frozen bagel. While the customers were initially upset, they later realized that no one had been complaining for 2 years and the quality of the frozen bagels was still fine. By the 1960s, Harry had passed away, Sam had retired, and Marvin joined the family business. They'd also changed the name of the company to Lender's Bagel Bakery. Soon, Murray and Marvin, as head of the business, were producing 750 million bagels a year. Murray apparently liked to say that he wanted to, quote, bagelize America, end quote. By the 1970s, Lender's advertised their bagels as, quote, the Jewish English muffin, end quote. In 1984, Marvin and Murray decided to sell their business to Kraft Foods for a hefty sum. It was sold on many times after that, including to Kellogg's Company for $455 million in 1996. Not a bad outcome for the whole family. Oh, I'm very sorry. In the meantime, in 1963, around the time that Marvin and Murray Lender were expanding their business, they encountered Daniel Thompson. Daniel Thompson, who died at the age of 94 in 2015, also patented the first foldable ping-pong table, or table tennis table, in 1953, which definitely deserves more research, I think. But for our purposes of discussion, he also invented the first bagel machine. As Matthew Goodman, author of Jewish Food, The World at Table, once proclaimed on NPR's All Things Considered, quote, there is a pre-Daniel Thompson history and a post-Daniel Thompson history, end quote, adding, quote, initially the bagel was small, dense, chewy, flavorful. Today, bagels are large, soft, pillowy, and flavorless, end quote. What is this magical machine? Well, basically, it is a machine that takes the dough and forms it into its round shape, and then releases it onto a conveyor belt. At the time, the machine could make up to 400 bagels per hour, compared to a traditional baker's output of 120 bagels. Murray Lender leased Thompson's bagel machine in 1963, which allowed Lender's Bagels to scale up their production. However, quote, it took 2 weeks and a lot of sweat, minor adjustments, and some accommodation with Sam Lender's doughs to finally arrive at a good bagel, end quote. As they say, the rest is history. I truly believe that if you want to have the traditional New York-style bagel, chewy, perfect with lox and cream cheese, and filling enough to last you until lunch or supper, you can find them in 2 main places. The first is at Russ and Daughters, a world-famous place that sells all the Jewish styles of fish, and also has a cafe if you wanted to sit and have a bagel. Do also go to the shop on Houston Street, which has been around for centuries. The second is at Barney Greengrass on Amsterdam Avenue. This is particularly well known to many people on the west side of New York City. Of course, there are many more of these bagel producers, but these 2 are my own favourites. As I mentioned, bagels not only went to the United States of America, but also went to other places that the Polish immigrants began to move. So let's just look at a couple. In Montreal, Canada, the Montreal bagels are very, very well known. Like New York bagels, Eastern European immigrants brought them to Montreal. But, to quote Food and Wine magazine, quote, Montreal bagels are smaller, sweeter, and thinner than their American counterparts, due to the cooking technique, end quote. There are, of course, different stories about how these types of bagels got to Montreal. One theory is that Hyman Seligman began selling them from a cart and then set up his own bakery in St. Laurent Boulevard in 1900. Another is that Isidore Schlafman and Jacob Drapkin brought the bagels to Montreal when they started selling them probably in 1919 on Saint Laurent Boulevard. According to writer Jason Lee, quote, compared to a New York-style bagel, what makes the Montreal bagel the far superior is that not only is each single bagel made by hand, but they are poached in honey water before being baked in a wood-fired burning oven. End quote. To be honest, I think that the New York bagels and Montreal bagels are very, very different types of bagels and should be treated as such. But hey, that's marketing agencies for you. The next part of the world will be my own hometown of London. As one famous actor, Stephen Burkhoff, once said, quote, America doubles the size, reinvents it, muscling up the slim European bagel and flavouring it for the ceaselessly unsatisfied Yankee palate, end quote. If one was to walk down Brick Lane, now home to many Indian restaurants run by Bangladeshi immigrants, one might be surprised to see two bagel shops very close to each other on the upper side of the street. They are spelled Beigel, which was the Yiddish way of pronouncing the bagel when they first came to London. This comes from a town when Brick Lane was predominantly a Jewish area of London, until the people of that area began to move out to wealthier areas outside the community. The first is known as Bagel Bake, the second is Bagel Shop. They have both been in the area of Brick Lane for many, many years. For example, the Bagel Shop has been around since 1855. There are many of these bagel shops in London, both in the Jewish diaspora and new bakeries. But I particularly wanted to mention these two, since they're very close to my London flat, and also they get featured on TikTok so many times a week, as Brick Lane is very close to Spitalfields Market and Whitechapel, where Jack the Ripper used to operate, and get so many tourists. Finally, let's go look at two of the bagels that have come out more recently. Well, to be honest, the first one didn't happen that recently, but in bagel history. In the 70s or 80s, they began to put everything on a bagel, hence the name. There are a few people who claim to have invented it. One of them was a restaurateur from New York, Joe Bastianich, who claims to have invented it in 1979 as a bagel delivery driver, and was inspired when the seasonings fell on the bagel during his journey. Another was David Gussing, a 15-year-old employee at a bagel bakery called Charlie's Bagels in 1980 in Queens, New York. He apparently didn't want to throw away the burnt seeds, so he told the owner, quote, hey, put these on a bagel, end quote. They did, and decided to charge more for this everything bagel. Brandon Steiner of Steiner Sports also claims to have invented it as a 12-year-old in 1971 while working at night at a bagel shop by adding poppy and sesame seeds, onion, garlic, salt, and more. Who knew? Working as a 12-year-old and 15-year-old. That seems a bit seedy to me. Get it? Anyway, whatever the true story, people seem keen on eating the everything bagel. And finally, we have the rainbow bagel, which went viral on social media in 2016. It was created by Scott Rosillo in Brooklyn, New York. Apparently, the bagel artist, which he wanted to call himself rather than a bagel baker, was soon charged with tax evasion and called it a day in 2019. Don't you think that's a colourful story? Anyway, that shows you that the bagel is still as popular as ever. From the Polish immigrants from Eastern Europe to the United States, New York City, to the rest of the USA and across the world. It is so popular that in 2024 we have around $558 billion worth of bagels every year created to sate the hunger for this rather lovely food. Which now makes me think I need to go and buy myself a wonderful bagel with a schmear of cream cheese, lox, capers, or onions. Or as I was to order in New York, everything with a lox and a schmear. Take care, folks. Make sure to check out the websites associated with this podcast at www.eatmyglobe.com, where we will be posting the transcripts from each episode, along with all the references and resources we used putting the episodes together, in case you want to delve deeper into each subject. There is also a contact button, so please do let us know if there are any subjects that you would like us to cover. And if you like what you hear, please don't forget to join us on Patreon. Subscribe, recommend us to your family and friends, and give us a good rating on your favourite podcast provider. Thank you, and goodbye from me, Simon Majumdar. We'll speak to you soon on the next episode of Eat My Globe. Things you didn't know about food. The Eat My Globe podcast is a production of It's Not Much, But It's Ours and Producer Girl Productions. We would also like to thank Sybil Villanueva for all of her help, both with the editing of the transcripts and essential help with the research.